Welcome everyone, Costin here with my warrior gearing guide for tier 5 in World of Warcraft Burning Crusade Classic. But before I talk about tier 5 gearing, I want to talk about Frost and Nature Resistance, because this is something a lot of tanks will have to deal with, which is getting Frost or Nature Resistance or a combination of both for the sake of Hydross. If you're playing a warrior, you're likely going to be tanking Hydross. You're not going to be tanking the ads. That's a Paladin job. Paladins are the ones that are going to deal with the combined set. When it comes to Frost Resistance or Resistance gearing in general, there are two things you need to worry about. One is having crit immunity, so you don't get critical blows. The other is having 295 resistance before auras. You need 365, including the auras, in order to reach the highest level of resistance possible. Now, there is a flask available that gives you 35 resistance, so you don't necessarily need to get it 295 just for gear. But whether or not you want to use a consumable for that, that's a different discussion. The gear sets that I have here do achieve 295 through gear alone. So when it comes to gearing, Ice Guard Helmet, 50 Frost Resistance, 20 Frost Resistance, Helm Enchant, 20 Defense Rating. This helm, with that Frost Resistance enchant, is 70 Frost Resistance in its own. Then you add in the neck, which is crafted by Jewel Crafters, 30 Frost Resistance extra. So that's 100 Frost Resistance from helm and neck alone. Shoulders, Warbringer shoulder guards, these are the ones you'd want to use. Once you get tier 5 shoulders, you may want to switch the gemming on these tier 4 shoulders. Like, you would still probably want to use the tier 4 shoulders, but you may want to switch the enchant, you may want to switch the gemming to help your resistance gear more, either for defensive purposes or threat purposes. Cloak Sergeant's Heavy Cloak, 27 stamina, 12 dodge rating on it. The reason you go for this cloak is the resilience rating on it, and it's also a benefit to a degree for threat. Chest, Ice Guard Breastplate, 60 Frost Resistance with 15 resilience rating, enchant, 10 defense rating on it. Not great. Frost Resistance struggles when it comes to defense rating compared to Nature Resistance. The Nature Resistance gearing in TBC has more. It is easier to actually get to the cap because of Cloak Enchant that gives you 15 Nature Resistance, and also the gear itself has more defense. Bracers, Vamp Braces of Courage from Atom Huntsman, King's Defender from Karazhan Chess Event, Aldori Legacy Defender from Gruul, Icebane Gauntlets from Vanilla, crafted, of course, PoE, 32 Frost Resistance with an 8 Frost Resistance armor kit, 8 defense rating. You can use green items instead if you get them, but these are the best choice available. Belt Crimson Girdle of the Indomitable from Morose, Pants Ice Guard Leggings with 60 Frost Resistance, 40 Stamina, 12 Agility Enchant, Boots Battle Scar Boots with Boar Speed and 12 Stamina gems on them, Frozen Eye, 35 Frost Resistance, Shapeshifter Signet from Lore City Exalted, Time-Lapse Shard, which has a good amount of resilience and stamina from Keepers of Time Exalted. Second Trinket, you can go for a Resilience Trinket, or you can go for a Defense Trinket like Adamantite Figurine, and Thrown Weapon, or Ranged Weapon like Gladiators, War Edge, or any weapon that you can get that might have resilience. Like, you might have to make some decisions when it comes to this. You might just use a regular thrown weapon and just go with another trinket that has resilience on it. With this gear, you have almost 13,000 HP, 295 frost resistance, and you are crit capped. You are not crit capped through defense, you're crit capped through resilience. There are changes you can make, as I've said. You could get a green ring with frost resistance, or you can get some other items with frost resistance, and you can potentially use gloves of the gauntlets of the Iron Tower, which have a lot of resilience and defense on them if you want to aim for that. There are choices available. This is not set in stone, and the kind of gear you're going to use is going to depend on what pieces of gear are you going to get. Like, what do you have? I would highly recommend that people do get the time-lapse shard, however, and they do get the Ice Guard pieces and the Pendant of Thawing. Those are really good pieces regardless. Frozen Eye as well. Though you could potentially, with this particular gear set, you could throw the Frozen Eye aside, use something like the Crystal Band of Valor, or you could throw the gloves away, or you could throw the Icebane gauntlets away, use the Iron Tire ones, and use the flask. Like, if you're playing a paladin, you don't want to throw away the flask, you want to use Blinding Light, but if you're playing a warrior, the flask, it's not a big deal. Sure, you're only flasking up for one boss, but for warriors, most of the time, using elixirs for most bosses is the better choice. So it's not like how it is for some other people where they would have to switch between flasks because that's ideal for them. If you're playing a warrior, you ideally want to use elixirs most of the time because that's what's going to help you out more. For nature resistance, it's a similar situation, though this time around it's easier because of the higher defense, slightly higher defense that these gear pieces have. Like the Wild Guard helm has 50 nature resistance, 20 nature resistance helm enchant, but has 28 defense rating, so higher defense rating pendant of Withering. Just like basically what's only really changed here is that you get Wild Guard instead of the ice pieces, but the pieces themselves have, like the chest and the helm, have slightly higher more defense. On top of that, you get that 50 nature resistance cloak enchant, which is going to make your life easier. So for instance, in this case, I don't have to use a gladiator weapon in order to get the crit cap, right? Because I still have it, because the pieces have more defense. The cloak has nature resistance. Also, the gloves, that the Iron Vine gauntlets, have more defense rating than the Icebane ones. So it's easier, like when it comes to saving money, it's easier to gear up for nature resistance. It's cheaper to gear up for nature resistance. The materials themselves are cheaper for nature resistance than they are for frost resistance. Frost resistance is more expensive. You need primal waters and fires, I believe, for the frost resistance set. You don't need that for the nature resistance set. So when it comes to advice I would give to a guild, the tank that you can rely on the most, the one that's going to show up to all the raids, right? You want to put your investment in, you want to give that person the frost resistance set. A more unreliable tank, you'd give them nature resistance set, because if you lose a tank, it's going to be a lot less painful and a lot easier to get a nature resistance set than it is a frost resistance set. Keep that in mind, that particular aspect in mind. Now, this has 298 nature resistance, slightly less HP, but still very solid. And here's the thing about warrior tanks. Warrior tanks, when it comes to tanking Hydross himself, are the best tanks for him. The reason they're the best tanks is because they have an innate, a certain amount of innate threat, or a lot of their threat is actually baseline threat, right? They scale with gear, of course, like every other tank, but they don't scale as much. Now that means they won't reach the higher numbers of druids or even paladins. But when it comes to gearing like this, they are much more powerful in terms of survivability, and somewhat more powerful in terms of threat than either druids and paladins. They're significantly more powerful than paladins. Paladins struggle the most when it comes to resistance gearing druids. Druids have the problem in TBC for Frost and Nature that they don't have a Frost and Nature set in TBC. They can use vanilla pieces. That's true. That's certainly an option, but they don't have TBC sets. They don't have these kind of armor options, and that's going to hurt them significantly in Burning Crusade when it comes to gearing. A lot of guilds right now are using druid tanks, and a lot of the top guilds, if we look over at Warcraft logs, a lot of the top guilds have basically abandoned using warrior tanks, with the exception of like split raids, farm raids, all that. But for main raids, they're using druids and paladins. But there might be a situation where warriors will be welcome just because of all this gearing. Or maybe druids will make it work somehow. Or maybe guilds will use 2 paladin tanks for the sake of Hydross. That's a discussion in its own right. So that's resistance gearing. What about tier 5? How should your tier 5 set look like? Well, there are, of course, tier 4 items that I've covered in my tier 4 gearing guide. So you have the bracers, you have the shield, you have the rings, you have the trinkets. You can swap one of these rings for the sake of more defense. You can swap the trinkets for more stamina, like rocket launchers. Everything else, and of course you would use the same cloak. Everything else, though, is upgraded. In terms of throwing weapons, Serpentine Shuriken, I believe it's the best threat ranged weapon for warriors in the game, or you'd be using it for a very long time. 14 stamina, 12 hit rating, 20 crit strike. Boots and belt and neck. So the neck has 45 stamina, defense rating, and hit. This is dropped by Carafres. You'll be using this until tier 6. It's really good because of the hit, high defense. Of course, it doesn't have the dodge that the Maiden Neck has, the Barbed Choker of Discipline. But at this point, you don't really need it. You have 20% dodge chance in this. Like, if you need more dodge, you can swap Trinket for the sake of, saying, Morose as an example. Morose Lucky Pocket Watch instead of using a different neck. Boots-wise, Boots of the Resilient, which drop from Salarian. Very high stamina, 2 gem sockets. No strength, no threat on these, but they're really good in terms of survival. Cloak. By the way, going back to Cloak, there is an alternative to the Delville Shark Cape. You can get the Alar Cloak, but I would not recommend it. You lose the block value, you lose threat. It's not really worth it. You gain, what, 15 stamina, bit of defense and dodge. It's not really worth it, especially not compared to a Paladin. Like, a Paladin will benefit from that cloak in ways that you won't. Or rather, you lose threat, they don't, so let them have it. Belt Girdle of the Invulnerable from Leofras the Blind, 37 stamina, 2 gem sockets, parry, dodge, and defense. Really good belt. It's actually the highest avoidance belt in the game, I believe, in TBC. It doesn't have as much stamina or armor as other belts, but in terms of pure avoidance, it's the best belt in the game. Though there are some choices available, I believe, or some choices might be available, or maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Yeah, actually, I am wrong. Never mind. Anyway, then you get into the tier 5 pieces. You will want the shoulders regardless, because they have defense, they have block value, they're really good for the sake of threat. But then you start considering what other pieces of tier 5 do you want. You want that force set, because every time you get hit, you have a chance to get 200 haste rating for 10 seconds. I believe it's on 1 minute internal cooldown, so just keep in mind there's a limit to this. But this is a significant amount of threat, and crucially, it's a significant amount of burst threat. You pull a boss, you get this proccing, you're going to do a lot more threat. Like, tier 5 is the highest threat set because of this force set bonus in the game for warrior tanks. Now, with that in mind, which pieces should you go for? Well, that depends, really. That depends on your luck in Karazhan, and that depends on what are you willing to use. Like, you should use the shoulders. You should use the chest because it has hit rating on it, so those two pieces are very much useful. But then you get the choice of helmet, pants, or gloves. Well, with helmet, you can argue... Like, I've put the Destroyer helmet here, but you can argue that having the tier 4 helmet is better than the tier 5 one. Yes, it has less armor, but it has more stamina, and it has block value. It doesn't have dodge rating, so you're losing avoidance there, and it has less defense, but it has that block value, which increases your threat. You still want to get the force set, so you're going to have to make a trade-off on some piece. I would recommend getting the tier 5 pants over the Rin Dynasty leggings because, yes, you're losing 2 gem sockets, but it's realistically only 1 because destroyers have 60 stamina versus 48 anyway, so you're only losing really the worth of 1 gem socket, and you're gaining a lot of block value with destroyer. I feel the Iron Gauntlets of the Maiden are a good choice to use. Like, this is the one item you might trade off, or you could use the tier 5 gloves. But I think if we're making trade-offs, I think trading the gloves, using the helmet, that's probably your best decision. But that's where I stand. Now, there is something to be said about helmet, though. The tier 5 helmet is an item a lot of people want. The tier 5 gloves, not so much. So it might be easier for you to get the tier 5 gloves than it is to get the tier 5 helmet. So you always have to consider that aspect as well, because there's going to be limited tier items, at least initially. Hopefully, we all get the opportunity to get as many pieces as we want, even for off specs, but maybe not. We have to wait and see on that. But either way, if you're limited and other people want the tier 5 helmet, yeah, get the tier 5 gloves. As I said, they're not people are not going to compete for those gloves as much as they're going to compete with the helmet. I believe DPS warriors, like you share it with druids, which, you know, some of them want it, of course, and priests, like, and of course DPS warriors. DPS warriors only want 1 or 2 pieces, one really, and they want the helm, for the record. That's actually a really good piece for them. Druids, feral druids, yeah, they might want the full set. Priests, shadow priests may want a couple items, but holy priests only really care about the 2 set, I believe. Like, the 2 set is strong, but otherwise other pieces they don't care as much. But the helmet is going to be an item that's going to be in contention. So is the chest, for the record, but the helmet certainly is going to be in contention, so you may not want to, you may want to consider getting the 4 set without it. Anyway, that's all I had to say on the subject. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. And check the link in the description below for all these items. I've linked them all in the links in the description below. Subscribe, like, and enable the notifications if you enjoy my content. Support me via PayPal, Patreon, and join my Discord. Link in the description.